Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 400 library systems across the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the amazing authors and presenters that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, I am so honored to be sitting here with National Book Award winner Colum McCann and co-author Diane Foley as they chat about their new book, American Mother. I know everybody is super ready to get started, but before we begin, let me pause for one moment to give you all that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but you can also submit questions during the talk by clicking that questions button that's just below the live stream video. Keep in mind, there are a lot of you tuning in today, so we will get to as many questions as time allows. And don't worry, if you have to leave early for any reason whatsoever, all registrants will receive a link to the recording in about 24 hours. Now, to formally introduce our guests for today. Irish-born international bestseller Colum McCann is among the world's foremost storytellers, and his fiction has been published in 35 languages. His National Book Award-winning novel, Let the Great World Spin, was a bestseller on 4 continents and was recognized with major awards from 8 nations. He is also the author of the acclaimed novels Transatlantic and A Paragon, which won the National Jewish Book Award in 2020 and was longlisted for both the Man Booker Prize and Carnegie Medal. He is the president and co-founder of the nonprofit global story exchange organization Narrative 4, which brings young people from around the globe together to walk in one another's shoes and harness the power of story exchange to foster empathy. His first major nonfiction book, American Mother, was published just last month in March and is our book of note for today, which leads me to Diane M. Foley. She is a mother of 5 children, including American freelance conflict journalist James W. Foley. She founded the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation in September 2014, less than a month after his public execution. Diane is currently serving as the president and executive director of the foundation, and since 2014, she has led the foundation efforts to fund the start of Hostage US and the International Alliance for a Culture of Safety. In 2015, she actively participated in the National Counterterrorism Center Hostage Review, which culminated in the Presidential Policy Directive 30. This directive reorganized U.S. efforts on behalf of Americans taken hostage abroad into an interagency hostage recovery fusion cell, special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, and a White House hostage response group. Previously, Diane worked first as a community health nurse and then as a family nurse practitioner for 18 years. She received both her undergraduate and master's degrees from the University of New Hampshire in Durham. Now, without further ado, and after all of those amazing accolades, welcome Diane and Colum. Thank you so much for being here. How are you both today?
Fantastic. I'm so delighted to be here with Diane and with you guys, and to have all the people from the libraries, one of the most essential part of our democracy, engagement with democracy, not just literature, but the libraries themselves. And so really honored to be here.
I too am very honored. It feels like the beginning of spring. It's nice and sunny today. So we welcome all of you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both so much for being here. I do want to just kind of jump in and give a very brief summary about American Mother for those who haven't read the book yet. In American Mother, the book explores Diane's relationship and forgiveness with Alexander Cody, a man imprisoned for beheading her son, journalist James Foley, in Syria. But it also tells the grueling story of what she and her family lived through during each of Jim's kidnappings, as well as what Jim endured himself, first in Libya and then again in Syria. Now, I know that's a very short summary, so please summarize anything else that you think we should know from the beginning. But the book, of course, is about so much more, and we're going to dive into that today. So we'll start then with Mary from Greenfield Public Library. She wants to know how the two of you connected to write this book together. And as I understand it, the connection was kind of more instantaneous for you, Colum, but not so much as Diane until several years later. Do you mind both telling us kind of your individual stories on how you came to collaborate with one another?
Diane?
Sure. Colum and I were total strangers. We didn't know each other, but our son Jim was very aware of Colum and his wonderful work. So Jim was a voracious reader. He was always reading, even in conflict zones. And there was a photo of Jim reading Colum's book, Let the Great World Spin, that was sent to Colum apparently after Jim's horrific murder. And I guess Colum tells me that's what made him curious about the story. And he reached out to me. But in the midst of that horrible time, I never received it. So it really was through a Marquette University book club Zoom that I was invited to. The book club was studying Colum's novel, A Paragon. And Jim's friend, Tom Durkin, was anxious for me to meet Colum and join the conversation. So that's how I met. And then he came up to visit the next weekend. So that's how it began.
And the most extraordinary thing happened when I visited, because we were just I was trying to find a shape for the story, and Samuel Beckett says it's the job of the artist now to find a form that accommodates the mess, and all this stuff was going through my head, and how would I help Diane to write her book? And then she's told me that she was going to go down to Washington, D.C. and Virginia, where she was due to meet the killer of one of the killers of her son, the British-born jihadist Alexander Coady. And for a moment, all the oxygen went from the air, and I thought, you're going to go and sit with this person, and she invited me to go with her, and we did a few months later. I'll never forget the extraordinary moment was we walked into that courthouse, into a big echoey room which was windowless, full of FBI agents and court clerks and prosecution and defense people. And Diane walked across that room, sat down at a wooden table, and Alexander Coady is there in his prison jumpsuit with shackles on his ankles. And Diane said, "Hi, Alexander. It's nice to meet you." And to me, that was a portrait of extraordinary courage, just to be there at that particular moment. And from then on, everything else was gone. Everything dissolved down to this conversation between these two people, which ranged over a course of 3 days, and it was about faith, and it was about violence, and it was about longing, and it was about forgiveness, and about compassion, and about acts of war and rules of war, and the most extraordinary human engagement that I've ever been really witness to. And to watch this woman whom I think is one of the most courageous people that I've ever come across, and how she engaged. And then not only did she do that and engage with him, afterwards she went out and she continued her work for hostages and wrongfully detained people. It was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. That is extraordinary. And of course, I'm sure it's no surprise to you, we have a ton of questions about how you were even able to get there in the first place. Catherine from Davidson County Public Library says, would you be willing to share your faith background and how it might have been instrumental in your interactions with Coady? And where did you even begin to consider confronting Coady?
Well, my faith is what's gotten me through. It held me up when this horrible thing happened to our beloved Jim. I'm Roman Catholic. I didn't become Catholic until I was a teenager, so it was a very deliberate choice. And so it's always been a gift to me. It's been something that's given me strength, without a doubt. And the opportunity to meet with Alexander came about partly because he was the one jihadist who pleaded guilty to all 8 counts of all the counts about torture, kidnapping, and accessory to murder. He pleaded guilty, and he offered to meet with victims. So there seemed to be an openness there. And I knew our son Jim would have definitely spoken with him. There's no question, because Jim always cared about the underdog. He would have wanted to know Alexander's story, and he would have wanted to give him the chance to tell it. And as a mom, I really wanted Alexander to know who Jim was. So it was a moment of grace, but I'll tell you, I really needed to pray a lot about it, because I wanted to see him as the person he is, flawed like all of us, with good and bad, and he's made some bad decisions that caused incredible pain to many people, and he needs to be held accountable. But nevertheless, it was a very sad but grace-filled 3 days in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to be witness to that faith was a blessing for me, and to try to understand the depth of what was going on when most people would turn away, and Diane decided to go to meet with him, but also to, as she would say, she invited the Holy Spirit into the room, I had to. I also have a Catholic background, but not the same background as Diane's. But I wanted to be able, for us as co-authors, to communicate that sense of faith. And I think it's there. I think it's deeply there in the book.
It's definitely deeply there. It's a huge thread throughout the entire book. You definitely captured that beautifully. And that also kind of makes me think about the narrative voice structure of the book, because it really gets to the heart of setting the stage on the who, not only, Jim and the kind of person he was, capturing his essence, but also capturing the essence of you, Diane. You had everything to do with the man that he became. And so I feel like the structure column that you employ in the book, how it begins with the third person, kind of this omniscient narrator, and then slips into the first person, and then again back in the third person. Was the importance of that structure? What was the importance of that structure? What were you trying to make the reader see and feel?
So the structure came to me the moment that we went into that room, and I knew I was in that moment, and I thought, well, this is going to be the moment that actually starts the book, because all else came, so much was present there in that moment, but then so much had happened beforehand. So the ability to go back and forth, because everything we are is everything we have been. So I wanted to put the reader in the present. So I'm really interested in allowing the reader to be in the pulse of the present, not to be told what to think, but to allow them to think. So I want them to be in the room. And then when we finished that chapter, that initial chapter, Diane says, well, it was time for her to tell her story. We switch immediately into her voice. And it's sort of like a kaleidoscopic thing. I do believe in a kaleidoscopic narrative technique. There's never actually just one singular truth. There's so much more than one truth. And so if you see it from lots and lots of different angles, I think there's a cumulative truth and an honesty that comes about. And, the other part of it is, frankly, you just hope that you're getting it right. You're a writer and you're thinking, I just want the reader to be there. I want to break their hearts and mend their hearts in certain ways, but I also just want them to understand who Diane is and who, in fact, Diane Foley is and was.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that you did that throughout the story itself, but then the poetry that you add to it definitely was.
Well, let's not beat around the bush here, though, because Diane knows that I'm a novelist, right, Diane?
Exactly. That was the only challenge we had. I mean, once Colum knew about the interviews and experienced the first one, he really figured out how it was going to go. He's a master at finding the structure. I think the thing that was maybe a little different and challenging for Colum is he's so wonderful at taking real events and then embellishing them so that people can really enter into the experience of those people. And in our case, the only thing I really wanted was it to stick to the actual story. I didn't feel it needed embellishment. So that was the part that was, I think, a little challenging for Colum, because he is so poetic and tended to want to add to the story. So, but other than that, it was a very smooth, once he found the structure, he did all the heavy lift.
There was nothing where you had to be like, come on.
It wasn't really that much embellishment. It was just like, so in particular, like with Diane's voice, me sort of pushing it, and the clash of voices coming together to make sure that it was true to her voice. I wasn't trying to invent episodes or anything like that. But I wanted, there's that moment where you want the reader to absolutely be there, and a lot of that comes about with language. Look, I wrote a novel called A Paragon, where I was with Rami and Bassam, an Israeli and a Palestinian, and one of the things that I said to them at the start is, I would like to write about you, and they said, yeah, no problem. And I said, but you don't understand, I make stuff up. And they said, there's no problem, because the grief is so big that if you capture a portion of our grief, that will be enough. And then with Diane, it became a different thing, because we decided immediately it was going to be an absolute nonfiction book. And so that, that we had to work together. I have to say, Diane edited beautifully. So we would get in, and then we would go back and forth, a kind of like a ping pong game, and to try and get it as truthful and as honest at the same time. All the truth and all the honesty, that was important to me.
Mm-hmm. There were pieces too of information, and I felt like some of them you could tell came from Diane, things about hostage policy and legislation and things like that. And then some other things like the origination of the word freelance and how it got attached to journalism. Was that research that you did, or was that knowledge that, like, how was the research process different for you?
For me, there was some research, but I'm a journalist, and I felt really close to Jim right from the very beginning. I truly believe that Jim and I would have been really good friends, and there are times I still feel him, speaking to me. He sits on my shoulder and talks to me. Even now, as Diane and I get to travel around and speak with people, he counsels me to look after his mom, and it's really quite extraordinary. And I had to do a small amount of research, but mostly it was imagining myself into Diane's life, and then coming out again and making sure that it was it was representative of where, who and what she was. And the most extraordinary thing about this book is so many people have come to us and told us that they've been emotionally moved and like really shifted by the story. And I was shifted by the story from the very beginning. From the minute I met Diane, I knew I was in the presence of somebody of great faith and extraordinary candor as well at the same time. I thought, okay, I got to get this right.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you all would have met were it not for the photograph of Jim reading "Let the Great World Spin"?
I don't know. I don't know. Perhaps we still would have been on that Zoom call, because we both have a connection with Marquette University, who's connected to Narrative 4, and that was Jim's undergraduate alma mater. So who knows? We might have, but I don't know if his curiosity would have been aroused as much as getting that picture. It made it so obvious that Jim chose Colum. Jim knew what extraordinary author he was.
It devastated me. It came on the same day that, and I apologize for this, but I saw, the photo of Jim with his head upon his back. And the very same day, I saw the photo of Jim happy in a bunker in Afghanistan, reading a book that I had written, and I just thought, we're connected now. Like, all those words are still there, and so I had a really, really, really visceral reaction to it. I think somehow the universe would have brought Diana and I together anyway, but it just made it so much easier. And yeah, I think there were a lot of things that knitted us together, right, Diane?
Exactly. It's extraordinary, really. In many ways, Colum reminds me of Jim. He's a brilliant storyteller, a great listener, and curious, wants to know what people are thinking and feeling. And so I'm so grateful.
Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful story of kismet and spirituality. Yeah. So Susan, you mentioned Marquette University, and Susan has just asked, in what ways do you believe Jim's Marquette education influenced his individual style of journalism and enhanced the foundation of your family values, which were instilled in him at home over the younger years of his development? But I kind of want to back up a little, because Jim didn't start off as a journalist, right?
No.
Right.
No, he didn't, but I do think Marquette's influence was profound. I don't even know if Jim realized at the moment, but he grew up in rural New Hampshire near a lake, just middle-class family. He was an altar boy all his younger years, but never particularly religious or anything, just a good kid, interested in life, had a lot of friends, and was a good student, always read, was a voracious reader. So when he went to Marquette, he studied history and Spanish. My mom is from South America, so he is particularly interested in that part of his Hispanic background. So, but from the time he went there, Marquette borders on a very poor part of Milwaukee. And Jim was challenged to tutor in the inner city from freshman year, which he did. And then on spring break, they would go to the Indian reservation or Habitat for Humanity. And I think all of those experiences just opened his eyes to a different part of our country, that everyone was not born with an intact family and food on the table every night. And parents who are present. So it really gave him a real heart for others, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting at Marquette, one of their slogans or whatever is "Be the difference." And I think without him even realizing, I think it really stirred in him, well, what am I going to do with my life? How can I make a difference? So I think it had a profound effect on Jim. I'm just so grateful he went there.
Mm-hmm. How is it that he came to journalism then, especially if that's not how he started out?
Well, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. And initially he thought he would teach. And that's why he went into Teach for America, did that, mentored a lot of young teachers there, but didn't think he was that great a teacher. And then he got his first master's in creative writing at UMass Amherst and really enjoyed writing. But finally, he became more and more aware of the importance of telling true stories about the present time, how essential journalism is in our democracy. And he was drawn to tell and write real stories about what's really happening in the world. So it took him a few years, though, before he found journalism. Then that's when he went to Medill Northwestern to get his degree in journalism.
I think, can I just add that Jim liked people? That sounds absurdly simple, but he did. He liked people, and he liked the world, and so he was willing to explore where other people would not necessarily explore. He would go behind the curtain. He'd go down the alleyway. He would go further to find the human story. He was really interested in what was happening in the sort of supposedly anonymous corners of human experience, which are not anonymous at all. He was finding the true value in the tiny little moment that actually reflected the epic, and the local reflected the global. And I think that in certain ways, he was very much ahead of his time in that. But he was also just a very good journalist, and he could capture things very well.
Mm-hmm. So you tell Cody in your one-on-one meeting with him that Jim was a teacher, and we have a lot of people wondering if you knew what you were going to talk to Cody about when you walked into that room.
You know, Brandon, I really didn't. My preparation was mainly prayer. I just wanted to be present and be a good listener of him, as well as share who Jim was. So I really was, my goal was to be open, to try to, and we had no idea how open he would be or how authentic he would be, you know. So the first meeting was rather uncomfortable, you know, awkward, that kind of thing. But no, I did not have a set agenda at all, except to listen and to share who Jim was. Those were my primary.
And I thought he was going to be a thug. I thought he was going to be a football hooligan, you know, and I thought I knew who he would be beforehand, because he'd been portrayed so in a lot of the media, which primarily came from the British tabloids. And when I sat down to talk to him, I noticed right in front of us, he was reading a book, and it was Patrick Radden Keefe's Say Nothing. So he was reading about Northern Ireland, and I had actually blurbed the book, believe it or not, Brandon. Is like, and so my name was actually sitting there in front of him. It was one of these bizarre coincidences. And both of us came out after the first hour and a half when we had our first coffee break, and I looked at Diane, and Diane looked at me and said, "Not that we like him, but we kind of understand him, and he was different to what we had expected, and there was something extraordinary about the way the exchange would build. He was a lot cleverer than I had given him credit for, and it was fascinating to watch it all unfold. Unfortunately, there were times he did think that he was the smartest person in the room, and but he wasn't pulling the wool over our eyes. But he did cry, and I didn't think it was. Diane, do you think it was when he cried? You didn't. We both wondered, is this theater? But it wasn't, was it?
No, I think it was quite authentic, and that's the part that was sad. That, you know, he made some horrible choices, and he will pay for the rest of his life. He'll never be free again. And he started crying when he showed me the pictures of his 3 little girls. You know, and that's the reality. He may never see them or return to his own country. We lost Jim. Thousands of other people were killed because of ISIS. So the whole thing was very sad. But important. He has, you know, people who do these things must be held accountable. But nevertheless, there's a sadness about it, regret. And he did express quite a bit of remorse, which I didn't expect necessarily. And he did express quite a bit of remorse to me personally. So I think he has a close relationship with his mother. So I think he could feel some of that, my anguish and pain, like I'm sure his mother has suffered from what's happened to Alexandra.
There's another stylistic choice that kind of stuck out to me in book 1, when we discuss how Cody watched Jim, the James Foley documentary, not just once but twice, and then you ask why, and he shares with you that he felt, you know, shame and resentment and compassion, and tells you a story about the death of a little girl because of American drone strikes. So stylistically, Colum, you go into sentences that are a page and a half long. And it was, I'm just going to read just a short bit of it so that people get an idea. But you say, even harder to explain that it is not just the story of a 1-year-old child taken from the rubble, or a father crying in a documentary, or an anonymous drone strike, or a tortured son, or a journey across mountains, or a screed of hatred, or a tower coming down, or a city suddenly filled suddenly with poison gas. It just goes on and on. The or, tacking it on. What was the stylistic intention here? Was it to illustrate the weight of the words and their meaning? What were you going for there?
It's an incantation. It was a sort of prayer. It was a music. And you know, you have these earlier, shorter, sharp, choppy sentences. And really what you're doing is you're trying to bring the reader along. It's almost like you're creating a symphony, you're a composer. And so you open with them, you know, the morning, you know, the curtains opening and the dawn and all these things. And then you're getting into darker moods, and then you're getting into, you know, all the instruments playing together, and you're trying to make people feel this. And so the incantation sort of works as you know, drawing people in, because everybody's involved in this story. And what I was trying to say, yeah, it is about a boy from New Hampshire, right? But it's also about a little girl from Syria. It's also about a guy who grows up in London, who got bullied in London, went down to the mosque, he did all these things. And guess what? Suddenly, all of these things are coming together, and we're all touching one another in extraordinary ways. And these stories that we tell, they're enormously important because they legislate the world. And the more we tell the stories, you know, on the supposed periphery, the bigger and better we can become. You know, because a lot of things can be taken away from you, but not your story. And one of the most beautiful things about this whole process for me was that I recognized that Diane was keeping Jim alive by telling his story, and even going in and sitting down and saying to Cody, I need you to know what and who you took away from the world. There was no confrontation in that, but it was really very beautiful, because she was saying Jim is alive, and he's alive in his story, and that, so you try to capture all of that in the language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. I felt like you did just that. You invited everyone into the dialogue, which is very important. It stood out to me. That's why I had to mark it. So speaking of telling stories, there's this moment in the book where you talk about Jim, a story that he wrote about a military sergeant counting out $1,000 to compensate an Iraqi mother whose son was killed as he was guarding a U.S. checkpoint. And you say it was as if Jim was telling his own story in advance. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that part of the story, that was Jim, and he talked about it himself in afterwards. And when he came back from Libya, he actually mentioned that story, and him being there and watching the people put a price on a life. Obviously, he didn't know what could or would happen further down the line, but I think that he knew what was you know, what these people were feeling and what they had felt. And this is the other thing about Jim: when he got there into those cells, and there were a lot of people packed together, he was the one giving away his clothing to keep other people warm, or telling stories, or sharing food, and doing all of that sort of stuff. You listen to the stories from the hostages afterwards, and there was something like incredible about Jim, where he sort of like intuited, you know, how people felt. And in certain ways, I think of him as a sort of tuning fork. You know, get the atmosphere of what was around him.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible to read in the book, and then also watch the documentary about hostages that he was imprisoned with, that were let go because their countries found a way to pay the ransom. Talk about how they had so much fun at times because of things that Jim would devise, these games with seeds and pits, and it seemed like he was helping everybody in the darkest of times and continues to do so.
That's beautifully said.
Jim would have wanted to do that. And Jim continues to challenge me and to challenge others to use our gifts to make a difference for others. I mean, really, I think that's so important. The world needs all of us to do our bit, you know.
I completely agree. And Heather is saying, you both have a lot of insight into the hardships of countries at war and the collateral damage that civilians face as a result. From what you've learned, what are some of the most effective actions that Americans can take to make a difference in helping conflict journalists and aid workers, as well as civilians on the ground?
I mean, one thing is to be aware, and to be aware of the value of journalists and teachers, you know, two undervalued professions that are the bedrock of our society and our future, really. And, you know, the James Foley Foundation is always in need of generous donors or those who are interested to donate their time and expertise. We do a Freedom Run every year, Freedom Awards, always trying to do things to raise awareness and celebrate our democracy, as well as inspire others to moral courage. And Column's organization, Narrative 4, does much to develop a radical empathy by the sharing of one another's stories, to really be able to enter into their world, if you will. So those are ways that people can really enter in and help out, make a difference for others.
Great, thank you. I agree. And for everybody watching, in the resources tab, we do have a link to the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation, so you all can check it out. So since 2014 then, has there been progress?
Oh, yes. And that's what's fun, because that is Jim's legacy in my mind, and gives me joy, really. When Jim was taken in 2012, there was no U.S. hostage enterprise. There was no one who was accountable to help us. As a matter of fact, I think I was quite annoying, because I quit my job and went to Washington looking for somebody to help me to make our government aware. And I was literally sent in circles because they didn't know what to do with me. But after Jim died, followed by 3 other Americans and 3 British citizens, all of us chose not to negotiate. So all of our people died, whereas the European hostages all were negotiated to freedom. That's why we started the foundation. We felt, as Americans, I just felt we have to do better than that. I mean, we have to find a way to have the backs of innocent Americans who are targeted simply for being an American abroad. So that's when we started the James Foley Foundation, and that's when a lot of good people stepped up to help us by sending donations, by helping us get a hostage enterprise started in the United States. So since 2014, more than 100 innocent U.S. nationals have in fact come home from kidnapping or wrongful detention abroad. And we continue to help others in that regard. However, we still always, this is a threat, and the threat continues, unfortunately. Some countries like Russia are starting to see this political, as a political pawn, seeing the use of targeting of people to use them for political pawns. So the challenge continues, but things have definitely improved. At least we have great people in our government who help families and really do all they can to try to bring people home.
One of the things I'd like to say here is I want everyone to look, and I don't want to embarrass Diane, but she was in her 60s when this happened to her, and she decided. I know she looks like she's in her 30s, okay, and let's. but she decided that she was going to do something to take all this grief and to turn it around and to create something from it. Rather than go into a corner and wallow, or rather than complain or be vocal about all this stuff, she decided that she was going to change. And she actually proved to me and to the rest of the world that the word possible exists within the impossible. Because it seemed impossible 10 years ago that we would change our hostage policy, that people would talk about wrongful detainees in a different way, that we would approach things that are going on in the world right now, Venezuela, Russia, Israel, Palestine, and that one person, Diane will admit there were many other people who helped alongside her, but for me, she was the driving force that brought this stuff into the public sphere. And let's face it, Diane was a nurse practitioner living in a suburban house in New Hampshire. She'll admit, in like a middle class family, but the power that she harnessed, whether it came from her own social engagement, whether it came from God, whether it came from community, is something that we all have, and we sort of tend to forget that we do have an ability in today's world to change these things. And there are a lot of people out there. One of the reasons I called it American Mother is because there are a lot of women in this country who are doing similar things on a community level and bringing attention to things and being philanthropic. The story doesn't often get told. I'm actually personally really looking forward to Mother's Day, in fact, and talking about this story, because yes, it's great to get flowers out there, and yes, it's nice to get candy, but this is also the story that needs to be told on Mother's Day, and what people are doing to change the world around them. That change is actually possible. Mm-hmm. And I think Diane is a perfect exemplar of that. I just embarrassed her now, but it's what my heart truly feels.
Thank you, Colum. I think mothers, parents, but certainly mothers love their children fiercely, or at least children need moms to do that. And I think within that, there's an incredible power for good, in terms of whatever challenges we face.
Yeah, Janine is saying, how is your family doing these days? And Gail from Goleta Valley Library says, what impact has this tragic event had on your other children?
It's been very difficult, particularly on the younger sons. Jim was the oldest of our 5, and very hard on his brothers, very hard. And a lot of them have processed it very differently. Privately, it's been very difficult. But any family who loses grieves. We all grieve loss. And so that's the part of humanity that we all share in many ways. And I think my challenge was to find some way to keep Jim alive, as Colum said. And I think the way to do that was to try in some tiny way, my little way, just to keep his goodness alive. Jim was very, really cared about people and others, and would have wanted to protect journalists and bring those home from captivity. So it's a way of keeping his goodness alive. And I think that's the challenge whenever we grieve, is to feel try to find ways to keep alive the memory of those lost loved ones.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what do you want people to take away about the role of journalism and truth seekers, and maybe even Jim's role in that?
Well, I'd really like all of our listeners as Americans, I really would love us to value our journalists. I mean, I think opinion talk shows have really maligned journalists. And I really think a lot of people don't realize that the best journalists are the investigative journalists, who are not only in conflict zones, but also in our country, listening to both sides and trying to give a balanced view so we voters can have some opinions and truth ground truth, if you will, of facts on either side of an issue. So I really feel that journalists and teachers, because they touch the future, the bedrock of our democracy. So I really feel it's very important as Americans that we value them and that we challenge ourselves to be people of moral courage and to dare to do the sometimes more difficult thing, but the right thing. Try to make a difference for good. So that's my hope, that Jim's story inspires you and those you love.
Yeah, and in relation to that, I just have to agree with Diane about the journalists, the teachers, and indeed the librarians, and not just to play to the crowd, because I do think this is very important. But I go through a lot of airports now again these days, post now that book tours are actually able to go, able to go out and book tours, and I hear in the airports that anybody on active military duty or service, please come forward and go first on the plane, and that's really cool. I really think those fine people do really fine work, and I have no problem with it. But I can't wait until the day when they say it for teachers and journalists and librarians and others. The people that we should value in the creation of this democracy, because our teachers in particular are not valued in the way that they should be. They're underpaid, they're stressed out. And where are all these, where is our democracy being exercised more thoroughly than in the classroom? Because that's the place where all these kids come together and you've got a chance with them. And then I think our journalists have a real responsibility to capture that as well. And there are a lot of really brave and brilliant people out there, telling stories. And also they're telling some of the good stories. And it's very hard to tell a happy story. I often say that happiness has a pale ink. You throw the pale ink against the page and you can't see it. Sometimes you have to have a darker relief against it. But to tell that happy story, to believe that what Diane has done beyond just the story of Jim is incredibly important. I'm an optimist. I get laughed at sometimes. I don't care. I do believe that the cynics are the sentimental ones, but that drives them barmy when I say that sort of stuff. But I do believe in the value of finding a little light in the darkness, and I think we need to tell those stories more and more and more.
Mm-hmm. I agree. We have a lot of questions about forgiveness in general, and I'm going to start with Mike's from Ocean County Library. Mike says, can we truly forgive someone for murdering someone we love? Or is it a way to try and ease our pain, suffering, and regrets for the loss of the loved one? Could it be more productive to work to remember our loved one and advocate for victims' rights instead of spending one extra second thinking of the murderer? Which I think, Diane, you're doing tenfold, 100-fold. But I guess the other, go ahead, address that.
Was there more to the question, Brandon?
Well, no, that was the end of the question.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think we need to do both. I think when someone dies violently, there's an extra layer of pain. I mean, it's just horrific. Mm-hmm. And I was only able to do this. We're talking 10 years later. This didn't happen the year Jim died or anything like this. This is, it takes time, but I firmly believe that hatred causes pain. So if we can't talk to people we don't like or won't listen to them, just refuse, just think they're not worthy of even sitting with them, that to me breeds more resentment, more hatred, misunderstanding. Whereas I think we human beings need to try to talk to those we don't like or we don't agree with, because that to me is the only way for healing, really. healing in the world, healing in a broader sense. But even what was remarkable for me is that it caused a bit of healing in myself, and I can't speak for Alexander, but I know Jim would have wanted to talk to him. Jim always cared about the underdog, the kid that didn't have what he had, or just was disenfranchised for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. And so there is some healing in doing difficult things, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I would agree, and to if I went back to Rami and Bassam from Paragon, their main message in life was, look, one's Israeli, one's Palestinian, and they would say, look, we don't need to love each other, and in fact, we don't even need to like each other, though we hope that we could, but we absolutely must understand one another, or else we're doomed. And so a lot of this is going in and trying to understand, that what Diane did was a leap of faith into a sort of new knowledge about things that were going on. And the world is messy, and the world is difficult and contradictory. But all things excellent are going to be difficult too. And I think part of that becomes with the human emotion as well, and bravery. And the bravery to do the things that sometimes are the things that people think you're a little bit crazy to do, and to come out the opposite side. There's something deeply, I don't know. There's something deeply human and Christian about that too, and I think that's part of what Diane was doing and saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amy would like to know, Diane, how has your experience as a nurse practitioner informed your work now?
It has a lot. It's interesting, as nurses, particularly as a nurse practitioner, I did a lot of listening. I would listen to people's stories. They'd come in with what was wrong with them, that kind of thing. And that was the only way I could have any hope of helping them at all. So now it's not that different with other people, families who are going through what I went through. They too need to be listened to and to figure out how we can be helpful. So in many odd ways, I wouldn't have expected that, but listening is critical in so many parts of life, right? So that's been helpful. And also empathy, just trying to empathize with other people's burdens, because we all struggle in life. We all experience loss. We all make mistakes. We all do things wrong and then try to redeem ourselves, if you will, and do better. And so these are very human experiences, So all my years of listening to many as a nurse practitioner definitely opened my heart and my mind to that part of humanity and our need to tell others our stories. Mm-hmm. And to share, ask for help.
Listening makes me think about meditation and like listening to yourself and kind of like that as a spiritual practice. And Phoebe from Orange County Library System is saying, in what ways do you see forgiveness as a spiritual practice? How can forgiveness radically change society?
Oh, to me, it's essential. To me, love and forgiveness, mercy go all together. It's hard for us to love one another. Let's face it. I mean, we hurt one another. We make mistakes. We're so flawed as human beings. We really are. And that's where my faith has helped me, because I think my faith has challenged me to keep trying. I fail, fall on my face. Well, pick yourself up and do better. Be kinder. Listen longer. So I really think, just like we need to forgive ourselves for things we don't do well, or times we've been unkind or neglectful of others, other people need that too. I mean, we all need forgiveness, and in one way or another. So to me, it's part of loving, it's part of healing. And I really feel it's essential. It's a process, though. It's not something that can be done right away at all. And it takes prayer and encouragement, and we need to encourage one another, I think, to forgive ourselves and one another. And one of the things I heard a lot going into the world was, it's the whole idea. I was surprised in Europe how much interest there was in this book. And again, I think it was because of the universal themes and challenges to forgive one another, and to sometimes see how the rest of the world sees our Western world. A lot of times they're jealous of us and they're resentful of our freedoms and such. And we haven't always been good in the world, and I think we need to be aware of that and hear that. So I do think it's essential.
I will just add very briefly that the ability to walk into a room and bow your head and say, "Teach me," rather than trying to instruct people about is probably one of the great superpowers that we have sort of we've let fall along the way for some reason, and that definitely keys into ideas of forgiveness too.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was very beautifully said. A is saying, thank you for the opportunity to pre-submit questions. So this is a pre-submitted question. What can ordinary people in the U.S. do to protect themselves from being taken hostage during travel outside the U.S.? And what information should a traveler leave with their family before trekking off into remote areas?
Great question. We did a little traveler safety guide, which you can get on foleyfoundation.org. I think the first thing is awareness. And to go into the State Department has a website called the STEP program, that when you choose to go to a country you're not familiar with, you can go in there and they'll have markers to tell you if it's a place where people are being targeted and kidnapped, in fact. And to register you can have an opportunity to register with the consul, the U.S. consul in that country. Because I think, and I think that's very important, because this is a reality in our world today. And whether we're traveling for business or tourism, education, aid, being an aid worker, no matter what. A lot of these other countries are poorer. They see, us as taking people as a way to get what they might need or whatever. So I think educating oneself about how to do that, just being aware is a lot of it, and behaving ourselves when we go abroad, being respectful of other people's culture. And, if you're in a Muslim country, maybe covering your head if you're a woman, just being respectful of the current culture, trying to speak their language, and staying in safe places, doing traveling with your eyes open and not flaunting what you have or your things or jewelry and those kinds of things. Just being smart about how we travel. Some professions have to travel, though, like international businessmen or journalists or aid workers. But when we have the choice everyone needs to be intentional about safety, no matter what.
I agree. Very, very good advice. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. It's truly been a pleasure to talk to you for the last hour. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Can we just say thank you? I mean, and thank you to everybody involved in all the libraries. Get the kids in, get them talking to one another, give them space, give them books, because this is the time. This is the time for repair. We're pretty broken right now, and in those libraries, the good places to come inside and heal, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I so agree with you, Colum. I just thank you for listening. And I'm hoping American Mother is going to come out with a study guide, and I'm hoping it can be used. It's a short book. It's a quick read. Colum's been ingenious of how he's made it succinct and yet poetic, as well as very moving. But it gets into a lot of subjects for students and adults to ponder, from our government to forgiveness to how we go about in the world. So I thank you for your time. Please, if you like the book, please share it with others.
Absolutely. And so as a reminder, below the live stream video in the Rate This Program tab, you can find a link to that resources area, which contains a link to American Mother and the James Foley Legacy Foundation as well. We look forward to seeing you all again on the 17th when we chat with Xochitl Gonzalez about her new novel, Anita Diamante Laughs Last. I am Brandon Adler, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.